So Debbie, you want to go ahead and call the meeting to order?
Sure. Mr. Freeman,
Here.
Mr. Kelly,
Here.
and Mr. Campbell.
Here.
All right. Pledge of allegiance. Brenda. You pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Brenda. All right. So, new business, Fire Chief Ray.
If it's okay, can I switch the motions order?
No.
Okay. Eli's on a squad run and they're pulling back in any second. So I was trying to buy a couple of minutes for him.
Switch them up.
Okay. So motion number 2, I request a motion to approve the Ohio State term purchase of a Lifeline Emergency Vehicles ambulance from Fund Superior Sales, proposal number 10107-0043 in the amount of $338,100. Noting that the cost of the chassis will be due approximately 9 months prior to production build, and the remaining balance will be due upon delivery, and authorizing the fire chief to complete the sales purchase agreement on behalf of the township. Noting that if the amount of the vehicle changes due to the market and sales purchase agreement, the additional increase will be brought back before the Board of Trustees. And I can explain because I'm sure you have
Please
questions.
do. Yeah.
So much like we experienced with the fire truck, the ambulance markets isn't any different. They are 2.5 years out for a build. I talked to our sales rep yesterday, actually at the class we were at. They're getting closer to the 2-year mark, but for the chassis cost, they don't know what the chassis are going to be 2 years out. So they're doing their best to estimate that cost. So if that amount changes, which I expect it probably will some, then I'll bring that back to the board and make you aware of it. So, when I talked to Katie to get the agreement and everything okayed, she suggested either we do it that way or not to exceed. And I didn't want to do not to exceed because I anticipated to go up some. This is a change from normal. We've historically since 1974 have bought Horton ambulances. This is changing manufacturers. Jim did extensive research into multiple companies. When we went to FDIC last year, we looked at met with multiple manufacturers. We just feel that this ambulance offers a lot more value for us. It's about $33,000 cheaper than Horton. Horton's about 3 years out on a new build. And this vehicle has a lot more optional equipment to make it better for our folks, as well as some safety features that Horton doesn't have at this time.
And just so everyone's aware sort of the background, are you retiring an ambulance or?
Ultimately, we will once the new one comes in. So we kind of have our capital fleet schedule. So we're due to buy one. When I talk with Debbie, I think the last 2 years we've budgeted for it, but with the volatility of the market, they couldn't commit to build times. They weren't sure how long it was going to be, and we held off. So they've at least ironed out the duration. So I feel like we need to move forward because they're only going to go up, especially with potential for aluminum and steel prices to increase. And it's going to be 2.5 years out. So I think it's kind of pertinent to do it now. That way we have it kind of in queue with their system so that it comes in about the time we anticipated to replace one anyway. And just historically, it used to be about 6 to 8 months from the time we ordered it till we would have one. And now we're at 2.5 years, 3.5 years, depending on the company. We currently do have the money in our EMS fund to cover the total costs. So we aren't asking to finance anything, and we don't have to put anything down up front as we've traditionally done in the past, just because of the long lead time. So it's just the sales purchase agreement and then payment due upon when they start to build for the chassis, and then the remainder at the end.
I have a question, Chief. You mentioned, due to the market and sales purchase agreement, are there some provisions built in there for X number of dollars increase? I mean, what's built into that in terms of how high the price goes? Is it a percentage or based on market conditions, or what's the language or verbiage in that?
They've got the total amount of the $338,100 as the quoted price. But then there's a notation that the chassis was an estimate.
Hmm.
So based on what the chassis was this year, and then whether it's 5 or 7% increase for next year, like that cost will be dependent on whether we want to go with Dodge, what we've historically gone with. So whatever Dodge sets those chassis prices to for the manufacturers. So that's why I had in there to bring back to you. So if they turn around and say it's going to be 345,000 because they underestimated the chassis, then I bring it back to the board just for the difference.
So historically, is it 5 to 7% in your experience?
I think historically that's been
Right.
about most of the manufacturers have been 5 to 7% increase a year.
Hmm, okay, thanks.
Okay. Well, do I have a
So moved.
motion?
Second,
I have a motion and a second. Do I have discussion on this?
We should have some discussion
Sure.
because I don't think he's pulled in yet, has he?
I don't think so.
Okay. So, what color will this be?
So it'll be white, traditionally, like the other ones have been. One of the things that we're gonna mix it up a little bit. So I'm sure you've seen Mike's Durango as well as the supervisor's truck. It's kind of the new stripe scheme we went to a few years ago that kind of mimics the police department. So we're gonna try to change the ambulance to match that, as well as the new engine that we'll have in a couple weeks to try to standardize the fleet. And that was one of the things with Lifeline. They told us they were happy to get us drawings of what that would look like on there. And one of the other manufacturers told us if we signed a contract and ordered an ambulance, then they'd provide them, but not beforehand. So it was a little irritating.
Let's see, what else can I ask? Do you remember the first ambulance we bought together? You got a grant from the state of Ohio.
I do.
And because it was a multiple jurisdiction.
Yes.
Piece of equipment. And I believe that the total price to buy the ambulance was a little over $100,000.
203 or 206.
It was 203.
Yeah.
But 100,000 of it you got out of a grant.
Mhm.
And they came like.
Yes. So I think that's kind of the other
I'm-
piece
I'm-
of,
I'm
for
aged,
discussion's
sure.
sake. Jim's been working with Ohio Township, and we've expressed the need for them to update
Yeah.
some of their vehicles. So he's got essentially a twin to this truck done for them, and hopefully some additional discussion to hopefully get them to approve an ambulance as well.
So Brenda, since you're here, could a portion of this ambulance be paid for out of, say, Prestwick TIF? Yeah, see, could you have like drawn that no out? Good, she did drag it out. She got it. Yeah, but the no was just too quick. I needed more time. I don't think your guy's gonna show up.
So how much is the chassis? Like, the 300, is it 25%, 50%? What is the chassis usually?
Great great question. I love having Brenda at these meetings. Yeah.
I was gonna say, yeah, low to mid 80s.
Hey. She asked in a percentage. She didn't ask. This is like Jeopardy. You
What'd
have
you
to
say?
answer in the way.
I
the
think
question
low to
is.
mid 80s for just the chassis.
Low to mid 80s.
Yeah.
Out of the
You're gonna
30,
do the
whatever.
percentage real quick? Nope.
My brain's still frozen from Wisconsin.
Probably around 20% or something. All right. So. Mr. Freeman, do you have any other technical questions? Perhaps like, do we want to put candy cane on this? Or,
Can we put sparkles on it?
yeah.
It would be very
Anything
nice.
else?
I've got nothing.
Okay.
I have
No,
nothing
nothing
when I
from me.
started this.
Okay. All right. So, I will need a motion.
We had a motion.
We had a motion. Oh, that was all just.
Oh, you want to do it
Wasn't
again?
it?
I'll make the motion.
Okay, I got sidetracked.
Pete, would you
I
like to do it?
seconded again.
Yeah,
yes.
he seconded
I'm
again.
good.
Thank you.
Still trying to drag this out.
So I do have a motion in a second. Roll call, Debbie.
Mr. Freeman,
Yes.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes,
And Mr. Kelly.
Yes. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. So, Craig, do you want to, we leaked one of your motions here?
Yeah.
It's coming in now. Perfect timing.
Perfect timing. It was like we didn't have to do anything to drag this out or anything. It's perfect. Thank you for, yeah.
All right.
All
Craig,
right.
you're up.
I request a motion to approve the appointment of Elijah Hammonds to the position of full-time lieutenant effective March 2nd, 2025 at the established rate per the collective bargaining agreement and to serve a 1-year probationary period.
So moved.
We get that. Seconded. He's like looking at me going, what are you gonna do?
I have a motion and a second. So I have a bunch of discussion on this topic. I don't see any. Roll call,
Well,
please.
the discussion would be, why? Why? Have you seen these guys? Seriously?
Roll call, Debbie.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes.
Mr. Freeman.
Yes.
And Mr. Kelly.
Yes.
Thank you. We could do the oath really quick.
Okay.
And then
Welcome aboard.
picture and we'll be done.
Absolutely.
I know.
It's promotion.
I know.
Awesome, awesome. Oh, there's Dada.
I'm gonna come down for this oath. Is that what for us?
Signatures.
Do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution and laws of the United States of America, the state of Ohio. Do solemnly swear that I support the Constitution and the Constitution for Applicants of the United States of America and the law of Ohio. And of Pierce Township. Will discharge the duties of this office. I will faithfully, honorably. Strive to protect our future. Protect the safety, lives, and property of our citizens. Protect the safety, lives, and property of our citizens. And my fellow members. One word.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations, Eli. Eli's gonna run fire.
All right,
There you go.
so we're gonna move on to any public comment or open floor discussion that we may have. There's a lot of people here this evening. Nobody wants to comment? Okay. Other business, economic development work session. Shall we hop in? Brenda?
Yeah, so I'll just give you the real quick rundown. I have a couple slides and then I'll hand it off to Brenda to kind of take it from there. So as part of your initial goal setting, one of the main points was to discuss economic development. And tonight we invited Brenda to help discuss and kind of navigate some of the initial policy discussions and frameworks, as well as some of the tools that are available to accomplish our goals moving forward. So the main inspiration for why we're discussing this comes down to a couple main components. This is not exhaustive. I know you guys probably have other items on your minds as well, but addressing any sort of financial needs of the township, always looking to be fiscally responsible, those sorts of things. It's always been a top priority for this board. Addressing growth, which can be very positive, but of course, there are other matters that come into play as well with growth. So demands on services, demands on infrastructure, things of that effect. And Furthermore, community demand for services such as retail, restaurants, and of course, redevelopment of other areas that may or may not be underinvested generally. So economic development being the main theme of kind of driving some of these decisions and helping us make better decisions and of course, in the most fiscally responsible way possible. In that same breath, I've included a number of items that are in our land use plan as well, just for illustration purposes. So a couple of these are key sites that can help kind of facilitate our discussions a little bit. They were pulled, generally speaking, because they're items that were determined to be high priorities in our land use plan, but also high priorities on items that we've been working through generally. So you'll recognize this site because it pertains to some of the facility analysis stuff that we've been doing. This is Pondview Drive. Again, this is an area in Glen Mary where there's been a lot of private investment, and there's also been some discussion about public investment as well. Premier is a site that recently turned over and is likely going to be redeveloped shortly. So it was included here for discussion. And we also have some other areas that were identified as key sites due to their proximity to high traffic volumes, as well as being on a corner and those sorts of things. So again, these are sites that have just been named by, identified through the planning process generally over the years as being potential areas of potential future economic development and future investment as well. Quail Creek Ventures is another site as well, which is adjacent to recent investment in the Klein Station vicinity as well. It also happens to be adjacent to a property that was acquired through the dissolution of Amelia. So again, just another item of greenfields, sites that are potential targets. They could develop soon, or they might not develop in the near future, but it's just going to depend on how the market moves. So just a brief overview of some of the things that we're doing. Some of us have had some of these discussions. A lot of what we do can be compared to a small market baseball team in a lot of ways. We're a township. We don't have overly complex tools. We try and keep it very simple. We try and do all the, we have to make a lot of small decisions correctly over time, effectively, and of course be fiscally responsible as we do that. So we've started doing a lot of things like grand openings, getting more involved with site readiness discussions with Ready Cincinnati. We do have a number of TIFs that have been deployed over the years and have been partnered with different infrastructure investments. And of course, a lot of the other items that we've done come down to coordination. Business roundtable development has been another major initiative that's been discussed. Again, it's a low resource intensive sort of effort, but it's one of those efforts that sticks in the same vein of partnering with the private sector, as we've kind of acknowledged the private sector as being the primary driver to how we facilitate economic development in the community. A lot of what we've done has been get out of the way, make sure our regulations are easy to navigate, and also promote a high quality of development. And so you'll see that some of the stuff that we've done as well pertains to elevating some of our standards in our resolution. Having said all that, we're all familiar with a lot of the limitations that townships have. For instance, it's kind of the base form of government in Ohio. So we don't have sales tax, income taxes, things of that effect in the same way that perhaps a city would be able to deploy them. So again, it forces us to be a bit more conservative and diligent in a lot of the decisions that we make. Density has been something as well where we've facilitated more of the suburban single family feel, maintaining rural, also the rural charm of the community, which has meant that we haven't gone as aggressively after multifamily development. We've tried to be more tempered with that. A lot of that also pertains to not putting extra demands and taxing our service delivery and our infrastructure. So the lower, more suburban density is obviously less onerous on our police, fire, and those sorts of things. Again, being a township, we don't necessarily have the tools at our disposal to level up all that infrastructure in the same way that maybe a city might. So we've had to be, again, far more diligent in addressing those matters. We also maintain a very lean staff as well at that. So we try to get more out of the staff that we have. And so it's all hands on deck approach. So having said that, the purpose of this meeting, again, is to facilitate more or less a discussion for developing an economic development policy framework so that staff has clarity on some of the discussions and priorities from infrastructure, and also some of the types of tools that you would be interested in facilitating, as well as targeting various different areas in the community to facilitate more commercial development. Because again, a lot of our tax base, particularly our inside millage, for instance, rests on residential property, and diversifying outside of that 85% residential inside millage is again something that's been identified more or less to take the pressure off of residents and the tax burden on them. So without further ado, Brenda Weimer is here as well to kind of discuss some of the tools that can be used to address some of the items that we have on our plate.
Real quickly, Eddie, what I would like to hammer down a little bit on before we proceed a little bit is to kind of ascertain what do you want us making decisions on? So I feel like that's a big problem where we kind of, come out of the back end of these things, and there's oftentimes this nebulous, sediment as to how the board may want to proceed, and then it's just nothing ever gets done. So what would you like, as far as the board is concerned, what would you like to see as far as direction as to, and it doesn't have anything to be anything specific, and I'm not asking you as to what you would like to see personally. All I'm
Right.
asking is what kind of direction would you like to see as the administrator?
It's a great question. So as far as this exercise goes, the main priority would be addressing this from a general principles and general framework perspective. So we don't need to get into the weeds about, I want to see more of this type of tool deployed or anything to that effect or anything that specific, but more or less some of the priorities of what kind of concerns from an economic development perspective you have. And that can help Brenda and I draft the general policy framework for you to basically review and potentially adopt moving forward. And what that would look like would basically be that document, which we would draft, would have some more, would have general guidelines, bumpers more or less, for how we would facilitate conversations when sites are redeveloped. And that way we can have a bit more certainty when we have discussions with using the Premier site, for instance. If that site is most likely appropriate, an appropriate tool for that site might be something like a TIF, for instance. TIFs tend to be good with infrastructure. And so making sure that we're not instigating conversations that this board is not interested in facilitating, but also not also doing our due diligence to make sure that we're pushing on the proper properties to say, yes, you might be interested in us helping market properties that we recently acquired from Amelia, for instance, or targeting certain vicinities in the township for new development. And so that's why I included some of those key sites as well. So you can have a feel for what we mean when we say, redevelopment or directing investment into certain areas. Right now, a lot of what we do is pretty passive, and that might very well be how this board wants us to move forward, which is letting development kind of come to us, maybe listing tools on our website and advertising some of those different tools, but not going so far as to getting overly aggressive, for instance, but getting a general feel for what the board's priorities are. And those might be diversifying our ability to pay for new infrastructure pieces, or focus solely in on the facility analysis and those sorts of things. But just getting a feel for what you guys are thinking in those general broad terms.
Okay, thank you for that clarity.
Sure, no problem.
Do you want that now or after Brenda's presentation?
Probably after Brenda. Brenda and I, also to preface, have had a number of conversations just about what our needs are, kind of what we're looking to do to ease some of the concerns that we have on a kind of day-to-day basis.
Got it.
She's familiar with that.
This is more for future reference. We're gonna cover some of this, not necessarily in a particular order, but it's more for your reference. This is sort of an outline of many of the basic economic development incentives that we talk about and everybody asks for. And what are they, when are they appropriate to use? It's more kind of what we're gonna cover today instead of how do you do it. In other words, there's a statutory set of rules, processes, and things that you have to do, steps to implement each of these. But that's a discussion sort of for another day. What we more want to talk about today is how do each of these work and when are they best to be utilized? So, you know, what do we mean when we talk about economic development, and what do we mean when we talk about incentives for economic development? So, and that economic development is growth. It's new development, it's redevelopment, it's bringing in and reutilizing existing businesses or facilities in a different way to add vibrancy to the community, to add services or jobs or, you know, property tax valuation, other kinds of revenue to the community and jobs and the services that your residents need, not the government services, but commercial services that they may want closer to them. So they don't have to drive 20 minutes or 30 minutes for this or that. So, you know, how do you do that? How do you attract economic development? Or as I suggested, do you just react to developers and business owners when they come to you? Or are you seeking to be in the business of marketing the community to particular types of development, and how do you go about that? And what are they likely to be looking for if you engage in those conversations? So in this day and age, most developers are talking about new development, cornfields or vacant lot development, or major renovation, redevelopment of an existing old vacant troubled site or project. They're looking for incentives. And the biggest thing to remember is that when a developer asks you for certain incentives, they may or may not really understand what they're asking. They may or may not understand that it's not the appropriate incentive to accomplish what they want. So, you know, it's useful to hear what they want, but then you always have to ask why. Why do they want it? And what is it going to do for them? So that you can assess with your team, is that appropriate? Is that how we can best serve their needs? And, you know, sometimes they're looking to fill a gap in the capital stack. Sometimes they're looking to fill a gap in operating pro forma, so they want tax breaks. Sometimes they need assistance from you in the form of infrastructure. Sometimes they need all of the above, and how do you marry those? So some of the most common incentive tools that we have are tax abatements, tax incentives, exemptions from real property tax. Those are the most commonly used tools, and they come in a variety of forms. They come in the pure, they don't have to pay property taxes, a certain amount of it or all of it. These come and look like community reinvestment areas or enterprise zones. Enterprise zones have to be specifically designated by the state, and you either are or aren't. If you're not, there's nothing you can do about it. If you are, those exemption incentives run through the county, but they will look to you for approval. Community reinvestment areas can be established by local governments. You have some control over that. Home rule townships have more control than non-home rule townships. Sometimes you have to have the county participate, other times you don't, depending on the facts and circumstances, who you are and what programs you put in place. But a community reinvestment area, if one is established for the subject property, can allow property tax exemptions of anywhere from 1% to 100%, depending on the facts and circumstances, for up to 15 years. That's the maximum duration. You do not have to grant exemptions for 15 years, but that's the max that you can grant. And that would be if you gave a 50% property tax exemption for 10 years, they would only be paying half of their property taxes for 10 years. It's just a complete, reduction of their tax. TIF, on the other hand, is written in the statute as a property tax exemption. They don't pay their property taxes to the extent of the percentage exemption. However, in most cases, they are replaced dollar for dollar with what we call, what the statute calls service payments in lieu of taxes. So they still pay the same property tax bill that they would pay with or without the incentive. But the county auditor, when they collect that, distributes it differently. It all gets distributed to the political subdivision that created the TIF, which can be the township, city, or county. School districts have no ability to take part in economic development other than through their approval when necessary and compensation if they may be entitled to. They cannot initiate economic development. They cannot impose property tax exemptions for TIF. They're just another player over here that we have to deal with. So the city, township, counties can utilize these programs and these tools. So if a TIF is enacted and service payments are imposed, money comes back to the local political subdivision into the tax increment equivalent fund to be used to pay for public infrastructure. The public infrastructure is supposed to either benefit the development which is being exempted or be necessary for the development of. For instance, think about a vacant cornfield that has no access to water or sewer and is not currently on a main road. If they want to develop this into an industrial facility, they're going to have to get water and sewer to the site. They may need to do major road improvements to allow for truck traffic and so forth. And so this is infrastructure that is usually deemed public and is necessary to develop the property at all. What could be used to help pay for that, redirect the future taxes into the public improvement fund and use it to help pay for the infrastructure that is necessary. You can also use TIF money to pay for infrastructure that is necessary as a result of the developments imposition on your existing infrastructure. So let's say that there is water and sewer to the site and there is a road. But now they put in an apartment complex. And now they're dumping 300 cars a day onto a specific road that has a four-way stop intersection. And now the traffic is backing up from here to here because it's all coming from one place and it's getting stuck. So you may determine that in order to alleviate traffic congestion as a result of this development that occurred, it's necessary for you to put in a roundabout to keep the traffic flowing in a different way. And so you can say this improvement, while not requested by the developer and not necessary for them to actually build the apartment, is necessary because of the impact of their development on our road infrastructure. So the TIF money doesn't have to be spent on site where the development is, but it's got to bear some kind of a relation to the project that is generating the service payment money. It can also be used to pay compensation payments to the school district. And it can be used to pay debt service if you issue debt to pay for the infrastructure improvements. So that you don't have to wait until the money accumulates before doing the infrastructure. Because particularly when you're doing infrastructure that's necessary for the development, they need it before it's ready to actually flow. So TIF is commonly utilized when there is an infrastructure need. If there's no infrastructure need on behalf of the developer, then a CRA tax abatement may work better for them if they need some kind of incentive. If they don't need any incentives and aren't asking for, we certainly don't want to offer incentives to them if they don't really ask for them. But if they don't ask for incentives, this is an opportunity then for you to look at and say, okay, they're coming anyway. They're not asking for an incentive, or they're asking for a really small incentive. Do we have other needs? Do we have other infrastructure needs that we could utilize extra revenue from here to help us with? TIF cannot help you with your operating budget, but it can help you with your capital project budget, give it back to so.
All right, so much information, Brenda. You just, yeah, I mean, for layman's like us, it's difficult. But at the end of the day, what we're kind of looking to ascertain from you is more information about our options in regards to what we could potentially offer to a developer or to somebody looking to locate within our township that wants to do something that's beyond our typical zoning regulations. So just for the layman, if I want to come in and I want to do a development or operate a business that's within the current zoning regulations, none of this stuff applies, right? I can come in, I can basically operate within the current restrictions, and I don't have to apply for, I don't have to ask the township, do you have a CRA or do you have a, I understand that. But if you buy a piece of property and you're operating within the zoning of that particular piece of property, generally speaking, you don't have to ask for anything, right? I mean, you can,
You don't.
these,
It's appropriate. If they're coming in and looking to do something different with that property, they're operating an existing business, they're happy, you're happy, everything is good. But the site next door is blank. It's been vacant for 3 years, if you're doing anything with it, you, the neighbors, would probably like to see something different happen. If a developer happens to look at it and say, well, maybe I could do this, run the numbers, the math doesn't work. Now they're looking for an incentive to make it.
yeah, I understand that. But I'm for anybody watching, because there's probably thousands, if not tens of thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands of people watching this broadcast right now. Just wondering, what are you guys talking about? If you want to basically build a house or do something with our current zoning code, you can do that, right? But these are economic tools to incentivize people to install certain businesses or do certain things that we feel as a board may be beneficial to the general community,
Well,
right?
You've got two different things here. You've got zoning and then funding.
That's how development Senate to change that.
Right.
They are completely separate from zoning. If a developer comes in, or if you're not happy with what is happening under your current zoning regulations, you have to make an assessment of your community and your zoning, and you have to decide, do we want to make modifications to our zoning code and regulations to be either, more open to this type of development or less open to this type? those are policy decisions that you have to make through the normal planning and zoning kind of process. Communities that undertake major overhauls of their zoning, and there are communities that, you know, kind of refresh their zoning.
So you sort of touched on the PUD thing, though. That is a zoning thing. That would be a zoning thing, would it not? Yeah, so that would have to come through the board. It would have to come through the Board of Zoning, come through all that. Would it not?
It does. and
So I don't understand that response.
Involving any kind of development.
Yeah.
So just really just kind of taking this back to the 5,000 foot level. So basically what we've more or less established is we do a lot of the passive items as far as trying to connect private developers, realtors, and so forth with other people in the community, other businesses, things like that. Grand openings, all those sorts of things. So but the major, there's kind of two other major questions. We've been operating under the premise of there are kind of four main criteria that drive the vision of the township. One is fiscal responsibility, stretching levies, first do no harm principles on our finances. That's the number one thing. So if good things are going to happen passively, great. That's number one. Number two is trying to improve the overall feel and quality of the corridor. That's kind of more or less as far as in ranked order. It's stretching the levees, taking care of the corridor. Those are the first two. And then number three, what can we do to promote new services that the community desires? That's the third item. And then the fourth item is new amenities. That's the park trail connections, pursuing grants, the pipe with a purpose stuff, improving our parks. So those are the four kind of main thrusts of focus where economic development really starts to play in. What the question becomes is whether or not, one, you guys agree with that general order, or if just to make sure that staff has a good vision of that, that's correct. And then the second part is, are there things that we're not doing from an economic development perspective that this board expects us to take a more aggressive footing on? And the answer to that question could be, well, you know, I think we should be more aggressive going after a certain type of restaurant or entertainment. And if that is the case, then it's okay, here are the tools that we would need to have in place or be willing to even kind of advertise that we're willing to have that conversation. Because what staff doesn't want to do is say, we're gonna make phone calls or we're gonna partner with a realtor who might bring someone in, and then we say, well, we're not ready for a particular conversation, that sort of thing.
Business comes in and says, well, you know, it's gonna cost too much for me to locate here, or the traffic count's not high enough, the head count, the rooftop count, this isn't a good location. Does that conversation change if you're able to provide certain incentives? In some cases, it's just too expensive, maybe. If the head count, the traffic count isn't right, no. But if you're looking to improve the overall township, you know, what do you need to do to improve head count? Do you even want to improve head count? And do you understand that, you know, you'll be able to attract certain things if you're this, but you'll have to be this to attract other things? You as a community may not really want that. You may think you want certain things, but when you find out what it takes to have those things, the trade-offs may not be what you want. On the other hand, they might be. And so, you know, to Eddie's point of, you know, one of the things that you and many other townships like you struggle with is revenues. You know, costs keep going up, but the way our tax structure, property taxes are your primary revenue source. And unfortunately, there's not a lot we can do to change that. Current law doesn't allow you access to a lot of other revenue streams, and putting levy after levy on the ballot, you know, there's a limit to how many times you can keep increasing the property tax levies. And the way that current tax law works in Ohio, your revenues kind of stagnate if you don't have increased property tax valuation from new construction. Inflationary increases, sexennial increases, triennial increases don't increase your tax revenue the way that new construction does. And so with your limited ability to diversify your revenue stream and you're heavily relying on property tax, increasing the valuation of the township from a development standpoint as opposed to an inflationary standpoint is really the only way outside of new tax levy that you're going to see increases in your revenue streams. And so, you know, it's kind of a chicken and an egg. You get a new subdivision and you get some new revenue from that because it's new construction. But now you also have new service demands on the police, on the fire, on the road crew. And so do they balance? Are you getting enough revenue to account for this? A lot of communities want to have a balance between the tax revenue coming from residents and the tax revenue coming from commercial properties. Because in certain situations, one may require more services than the other. So if you can get both to pay into your pot, it takes some of the pressure off. And so you as a community have to decide, what do we really want to be? I think that is the direction that we're looking for is, do we want to remain charming and quaint and small and let development happen sort of organically? Property owners are in charge of selling who they want to, zoning's in place, if they make it work under the existing zoning, fine. And we don't want to be offering a lot of incentives, so what comes will come. Or do we say, we like to move the needle up a little, we like to get a little more density, a little more modernization in some parts of the township, perhaps the 125 corridor. What do we want that to look like? And then do we understand what it's going to take to attract that kind of development and be able to maintain and sustain it? And so I think that's sort of what we're talking about in terms of there are various economic development incentive programs out there. But if you don't have a vision for the township, then we can explain what they are, but until you have a project, it's hard to know when it's the right time to use a particular tool or not. Because it really does depend on different facts and circumstances. But
Potter Stewart, right? I know it when I see it, right? So I won't know what type of economic development, what type of incentive package I can bring to the table until I know what the project is. So as an example, let's use the Purple Monster. What's it actually called? The Premier Site?
Yep.
Right. So the Premier Site is 12 acres of commercial property, right? So a commercial TIF is very different than a residential TIF. We discussed that a few minutes ago. So right next to it is a residential TIF, right? Because the subdivision that's tucked right next to it, we made that a residential TIF.
funds.
Correct.
Not for improvements that the developer.
Right. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen at the Premier Site. At the moment, we suspect that it's going to be something, it's going to be a nursing home, right? So once that starts to come out and we get to see more of the details, then we'll be able to determine whether we want to do a TIF underneath that property or indeed try to talk to the landowner and break it into two TIFs. So then you've got the ability to have a commercial TIF on both sides or resident anyway. So as that project moves forward, so I think what Eddie is actually jumping forward to what I'm trying to discuss, what Eddie is asking us to try to decide is, when it comes to the economic development, and correct me if I'm wrong, when it comes to economic development, he wants to know whether you want to be, you said, a small market baseball team, or if you want to try to, from time to time, be the New York Yankees. and go out and try something big and bold and try to move forward. That would require that we do things very differently. We have to look at the possibility of stepping up, and we're dealing with developers. Right now, we're dealing with developers that are coming to us that have a project they're interested in doing, and it's much more passive. Correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And basically this whole thing is predicated on, I want to make sure that we are doing what we're meeting your expectations on what you're anticipating. So for instance, if someone has a feel that we really need to be pursuing certain types of businesses, or we really need to be driving corrections to infrastructure along the corridor, for instance, we just want to make sure that we're focusing our energies the way that you desire that to be done.
Right.
And for instance, this.
Okay, because we're going in circles here, okay?
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt, and I don't want to be impolite by any stretch. I think you're looking for some ideas. So I'm going to give you mine in the interest of time. And then my colleagues can chime in as they feel they need to, okay? So I like your idea about do no harm first, okay? So we'll start with that little bit of that suggestion that you made. So first, one of the things I see in terms of doing no harm would be bringing dense development like multifamily into the township. I don't support that. I don't think that would be healthy for our bottom line. I think it would be a strain on our safety services. And I think de-emphasizing that would be a priority. And everything I'm going to say is in context of the land use plan that our citizens have expressed to us as what they want in the township. Okay. So number one, do no harm, like you said. So my opinion would be number one, limit. This is the idea session, right? So I'm going to give them to you. Number one would be to limit multifamily development. I wouldn't, in my opinion, support that kind of a development. Number two would be to avoid the kinds of services that degrade retail establishments and that degrade our corridors. Like for instance, 125. We have a lot of opportunities there, I think, to bring in high-end facilities, in particular medical. I brought this up before because I think there's a medical desert in that eastern end of the township. A lot of folks in that section of our township, it's a little bit of a stretch for them to drive to Anderson to go see medical people, or to go to an urgent care or emergency medical facility out in Claremont or Anderson. So I want to emphasize bringing in the right kind of commercial developments, not degrading, not doing harm to that corridor or elsewhere. So emphasis on high quality businesses, high-end establishments, higher end restaurants, not so many Popeyes, not so many Arby's, not so many McDonald's. So that would, in my opinion, be, creating potentially some harm. Okay. And those kinds of establishments serve crappy food anyway, in many cases, and they do harm the community by damaging the health of the community. Okay. So just kind of recapping. Do no harm, limit multifamily from my perspective, limit the kinds of businesses and retail establishments that could harm the health of the community and otherwise harm the community, bring in high quality facilities like medical, for instance, okay, would be one thing that I would emphasize. And then lastly, the one thing I want to say is when it comes to developing residential, I favor the more passive approach. And I'll tell you why I favor it that way. I don't think we have a lot, we have some, but I don't think we have a lot of large parcels like where Prestwick was developed and the like for bringing in big development. So I favor larger lots, larger homes, higher quality, less dense, which again, will not harm or stretch our safety services as much as higher density developments would. And I think too, that would make a dent in the bottom line when it comes down to bringing in property tax revenue. So higher end would, I think, be more beneficial to the township as a whole, both aesthetically and from a budgetary perspective. And I think from the passive perspective, that's probably going to happen whether you go chasing it or not. Okay. And then one last thing, and I want to let the others speak because I don't want to monopolize the time, but we have, I think, an industrial opportunity along the river, Beckjord, the old Beckjord site. Okay. And I know there are some ideas swirling on that, but I think there is a potential revenue generator for the township. And that could be either in the context of property taxes and or a JED type thing where you bring in income tax revenue. Okay. I think that's one of the last remaining quasi-industrial sites that we have in our township that really, I think, could become an economic driver. I don't think we have a lot of pieces of ground that would mirror or exceed that, what's down along the river. So, there I think is an opportunity. And those were my ideas. And I didn't mean to cut you off, Brenda, but because I think I wanted to get all that out there because I think that, what Eddie's looking for is direction. And then once we give him that direction, then we can employ, as needed, the tools in your toolbox as you've described them. Okay, next.
No, I think you're dead on. I mean, I think that's, when we're talking about ideas, I mean, that corridor is, the 125 corridor. I agree with you about Vector, but I think we're farther away because of environmental issues on that site. We're not going to see a return on that yet.
Yeah, soon, right.
But 125 is current. It's there, and we already know what the possibilities are. The idea of having medical, that's something that I think is really, it fits, to my mind, it fits in that corridor. And it's a good use. I mean, you're right. I mean, the only places we have are, you either go up to Eastgate or, because that's where Bethesda is. Bethesda? No,
Something like that. I
it's-
can't.
it's
Mercy, right.
We're going into Anderson,
Right.
so you do have a gap. So I think that what you're suggesting is actually right on. I mean, I think it's the kind of thing that we can work on. But then once you get into the heart of the township, where you're starting to talk about the residential component, I think that's where you play a little bit more hardball, and try to get the kind of development that, that you want, that the community has expressed that they want. And it mimics what we already are seeing. So I think you just stay on track with the way residential is operating right now. And then really focus in on 125 for the moment, because that's I don't want to say a quick hit, but it's an area that we have a pretty solid sense of what can and cannot go. Now, when the premier site develops, I mean, if you're talking about a nursing home facility, we just don't know what they're going to add to it. So there could be medical attached to that, but there would end up being the ability to market it based on medical around a structure like that. So we're kind of in the waiting stages on that. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right on.
So, Eddie, you're gonna get all kinds of direction and you're not gonna know what the hell's going on. You're gonna think, yeah, I'm more confused than when I was when I came into the meeting. So with some of the residential, I agree. I think that if we're gonna look to give up things on a PUD, it's been my general approach since I started as trustee, that we need to get something for it, right? If we're gonna give up density, we need to get some kind of community benefit for what you're doing in that regard. But I do think with my underlining zoning question is an applicable one to start out, which is, basically anybody's free to come in and develop under our current zoning in whichever particular area that they're looking to develop in. But if we're going to basically offer incentives on certain things, then we're kind of putting our thumb on the scale a little bit here as a government. And that is an area in which I'm kind of uncomfortable wading into in a lot of regards, because I'm a little bit more libertarian, in which I think the free market should be left to sort itself out for the most part. And we have our zoning, we have it, and anybody is welcome. Anybody among the playing field is welcome to come in and sort of, try their hand at being successful at a certain parcel and a certain business or whatever that might be. So if we're going to offer an incentive to someone, I just want to be clear that when we offer that incentive to someone, we're creating an opportunity for somebody, but we're kind of taking something away from somebody else potentially. That could be a unintended outcome of those types of, things that we're talking about doing, that we are kind of inherently displaying at this point as being, basically good, and not always basically good. So I just want to be mindful about what kind of incentives we offer, and how we put our thumb as on the scale as a government, and ensuring that we're kind of doing our I feel like due diligence as a government is providing a fair and even playing field for everybody who wants to come and play. And that's where some of my apprehension comes from on some of this is, I'm not necessarily opposed to creating incentives and things like that. If you have a site that, you know, hasn't had any movement in quite some time and no one's interested in it, and, you know, certainly this could be situational. I'm not saying that I'm completely opposed to that, but I am saying we should be a little bit, you know, I played devil's advocate as it could go both ways a little bit.
Well, I think when it comes to incentives, I think what we're saying is that it's the package that we're able to present is finite. And it's set by the state of Ohio. And those are the only things that we can really offer to potential developer. Now, what will happen is that as developers come forward, and I appreciate what you're saying, but the problem is that every community, and you're not gonna like what I'm gonna say, I know it right now, but that's the way this works. And if you're going to try to get a developer to come to your community, their expectation is that you're going to give them a package of incentives.
It is becoming very common for particular types of development. But again, for instance, right now in many communities, what is prevalent, what developers do want to build is what you're not necessarily interested in, apartments.
Right.
This is the hot commodity right now in Ohio, and certain other places because of the current status of the younger generation. They're more interested in renting than owning. There's already a housing shortage, so apartments are what are in demand. Is that does not appear to be something that you're interested in. So you're maybe quite happy to let these developers go, you know, try to get incentives from other communities and build their apartments wherever they're going to get the most incentives, because that's not necessarily something they're interested in. But to the point of, you know, let's take a parcel on 125. You would like to see some medical facilities there. Developer looks at it and says, rooftops, traffic count, distance to other equally, price of the land, price of construction. And RVs is what really will make sense here. And so you say, we don't need another RVs, but under your current zoning, you can't stop it.
Yeah.
But if you say to the medical guy, okay, we get it. Headcount's not exactly where you want it to be, but if we were able to offer XYZ incentives to bring your costs down, would it now make sense to put a medical facility here rather than letting it go to this guy? These are when you need to decide if it's worth it for government to step in to change the narrative versus.
So to provide, so that the market would say there's an RVs, the market would say that the market demands an RVs. And as a government, we would come in and say,
very different wording.
we know better. We know better than the market. We are going to put in a medical facility. And so you are in essence kind of putting your thumb on the scale of the capital market at that point.
But just for
You
fun,
are.
but
As
just
a
for fun,
government,
but
that's
just
what
for
you're
fun,
doing.
but just for fun, let's play this out.
Yeah.
We also use code words, like the community has told us what they want. And so that's a code on our side to say that's not what we want. And so we're always putting that thumb on the capital market. And the capital market is always putting the thumb on the capital market because they're walking in saying, here's my pro forma. I need this to be $125 per square foot, and it's $170 right now. And if you want it, if you want this development, you're going to pay the difference.
Well, as the debate goes, it's a representative government, and I've been representative, and so have you, and that's my interpretation of it.
Well,
You know what I
that's
mean?
true. And that's pure, but it's different. I mean,
I don't-
you're talking about capital and you're talking about politics.
answer, and there is no crystal ball to say.
There actually is a right or wrong answer. The right answer is no incentives at all. And that's just the way it should be.
Is.
Right.
You're competing against everybody else for the same projects. Do you want that project enough to bring the incentive? Or do you want the market to control? Because to your point, let's say that the market says we can support an army. And I'm just using armies for no good reason, but they put an army here and it's successful. We intervene and provide enough incentives to encourage someone to put up a medical facility. But in 10 years, when the incentives run out, it's not supportable, it's not sustainable, it's not doing what it needs to, and so in another 5 years, it's vacant again. Those are, we don't have.
Those are, I mean, let's just say we want a restaurant in Pierce Township and we think there should be a restaurant in Pierce Township. So we want to offer a tax incentive for a restaurant in Amelia and we give them the tax incentive and within a year, they're not there anymore because they can't sustain. So again, we've put our thumb on the scale when the society in which we live in, that it has been proven time and time again.
But that's not accurate.
That the capitalism will reign supreme.
But what you just said is
reign
not,
supreme. You
time
just
out,
need
time
to
out.
let it do
Time
it.
out, Brent. But that's not accurate. You're talking about a restaurant that went into business at a time of COVID. It went out of business.
I'm
There
not
wasn't
talking
incentive.
about a particular.
I know you're not, but you're talking about an incentive package that we put together to try to put together to create a restaurant in Amelia. What ended up happening was the business went out, but the actual structure was created. So now it's a restaurant, not a house. And so now you've moved.
I don't want to
it
get in the
improved-
weeds on that. I'm not.
But
I'm
you
not-
got into the weeds. You took us into the weeds.
No, what I'm saying is that in theory, if the rest, because when I campaigned and when I went out and knocked on doors, everybody wanted a restaurant in Pierce
Yeah, they did,
Township.
yeah.
And so, you as an elected official, you want to go and you want to provide the people with what they want, right? You want to basically deliver on that expectation. And so you come out and you create incentives for a company or somebody to come in and do a restaurant in Pierce Township. All I'm saying is that is the pitfall is that, and I'm not speaking in specifics, all I'm saying is that if you were to create incentives for a restaurant like that to come into Pierce Township, because generally that was the message you got, this is what people want, the basically supply and demand has always reigned supreme. It always reigns supreme. It knows better than you know as far as what will really work in a certain environment. And so how much do you want to put your thumb on the scale with that is the only question I'm asking.
Well, what
is
about-
how far do you want to go as a government with
But
that?
then I would pose an additional question to you, which is what about neighborhoods who have gone down over the last 20, 30 years? And they've become eyesores, they've become dangerous, they have a whole host of reasons. And governments largely and the private sector have worked together to create a new future for them that includes heavily incentivized development. Madisonville would be a good example. Madisonville has now had a rebirth because of economic development. Oakley would be another one. What is it? No, it's the playing card
Well,
play.
fortunately, with the prudent decisions we're going to make on this board, I hope we avoid that moving forward. I hope we never get there.
Well, we're already there in some communities. I mean, it's time to start investing, like for instance, in parts of the 125 corridor. There are some structures that needed to be removed, and we've done that. That's government incentives by talking to, what's his name?
Desmond.
And getting a
Economic
grant.
Yeah.
And we tore down a building. So some of the eyesore left. And so, no, the private sector is not going to do that.
So I'm not a libertarian, the purest one. Some of
You're
it
just a
would
little?
make sense, But
Just a little.
yeah, I mean, I would say, yeah.
Fair.
So,
I have pretty good
I don't know
clarity
what it's worth.
on this. So
put it in
moving
your pipe and
forward,
smoke it.
I have a good idea of it. I think of the general sentiment is that we don't have a huge appetite for being overly aggressive toward these businesses, but we'll continue the course that we're on, which is maintaining that so a lot of the conversations that we have around new developments and informal conversations, for instance, we've been promoting those types of uses that the community has stated they have a desire for, as well as including medical uses, higher end restaurants and things of that effect. So again, our main approach is, or our main focus at a staff level is making sure that we are doing what you are expecting and not having any surprises. Again, like we don't want you to wake up one day and say, why haven't we been doing X?
Mhm.
And so making sure that there's certainty in that framework. And so the course that we've been on has been on that angle. And so we're good on that. And Mr. Freeman made a point about the residential neighborhoods, for instance. And so I want to make sure I stay out of necessarily the policy making end of this, but some of the incentives I think that were being alluded to, and they've been pretty prominent in the Rust Belt, for instance, is we call them tax abatements, and we're kind of saying, well, the government might be putting their finger on the scale. I think that's definitely a way to look at it, but a lot of what our challenge is, for instance, those types of neighborhoods and townships, for instance, like we don't have a vehicle for directly injecting cash into the improvement of a single residential site, for instance. What we do have are programs that say, well, we're going to effectively take we're going to push less tax onto you. And in exchange, there is a private investment that will go into those areas or that structure that is effectively of an equivalent nature. And so that is a sort of an approach that has been done. I'm not saying that we need to be doing that, but part of the conversation, it's an uncomfortable conversation I wanted to at least broach, is the conversation about tax abatements, which mathematically, again, we've been operating under and continue to operate under the premise of, if the math doesn't net out, it's not a good decision. It's not a decision that this township wants to be making.
Well,
So
I think that when we're dealing with these incentive packages or we're dealing with the development, we need to think of it from the business perspective, right? So if we're going to invest in it, we better get something that return on investment better be significant. My view, and it's just mine, is I would find it almost an impossibility that I would like to see a residential TIF, for instance, utilized internally on the creation of the roads, the infrastructure necessary for a development. It has long irritated me, and I think that you and I should, and Pete, I don't think you've seen enough PUDs come forward, but it has long irritated me that PUDs are a load of crap. And that, the developer, and they'll stand here and they'll tell us, we're going to give you 20% of the property and it's going to be green space. It's the hill, the crap that they don't want and they can't build on. So there's nothing beneficial for this township necessarily in what they're giving us. And so personally, I'm not in the business of making sure that a developer gets to make an extra 100,000 or 200,000. I'm not there to make their profit for them. So I guess that if you're looking for something that I want to make sure we don't do, the other thing is that has bothered me over the years is, while we're at it, the number of times I continue to get the same development that comes from the planning commission that I voted against 3 or 4 and 5 times. Have you had that experience? Where it's like, I voted against it once. It didn't change. It's the same development. It's just maybe 2 less houses. And it's like, I'm going to vote against it again. At what point do you need help understanding how I'm going to vote on that? Davis Road is a prime example, and it just kept coming back. So, that's another thing that from a zoning perspective has been irritating. Other thing is, I think when you're talking about multifamily, and we have some multifamily in the township, property maintenance code, I think that's what, the 15 millionth time I've said that term in this room. Property maintenance code would have been hugely helpful when we were dealing with the development over in your neighborhood. what was the name of that?
On the
Still,
green.
still on the green. If we'd had a property maintenance code 15 years ago, it would have been very helpful in trying to take care of the incidental, errors in that building that ended up turning it into squalor. So I'm gonna say at 15,000,001 property maintenance code, we need to institute that. We need to probably start thinking about whether or not we want to be home rule as well.
Yeah, can we do that if we're not home rule though? That's a question that's come up before. Oh, okay, all right. Okay,
Either way,
I mean, I support it, but.
if we
I mean,
have
you
to
know.
do it,
But
then
by
let's do it.
being mindful of our development, what we allow at the township, we can avoid the on the green type scenarios. I
But we
feel like
can't.
that is something.
But we can't because it starts
Yeah,
to
we
develop
can.
over time. It continues to erode. Whenever your point is well taken, and I don't agree
Yeah, don't-
completely with apartments. I think you can get decent apartments in a community that match the community. But as it starts to grow,
Yeah, I
it gets
understand
old and
that.
it
Yes.
rots.
Yeah. So
And so-
multifamily should be something we heavily scrutinize.
Yeah. And with the property maintenance code, you can have it.
All right.
Yeah.
So,
That's true.
It's not occupied, sustainable, and maintained all sorts of property and development, single family, residential, multifamily, can deteriorate. And so, yes, what do you do to help keep existing development vibrant, sustainable, and well maintained? And what role do you have in that?
okay. So Eddie, I'm sorry to head off the rails so much. I know you're just looking for guidance as in regards to sort of what we're looking for as a board to direct you in regards to what you can do and not do as far as economic tools, which is why Brenda's here. So is there any other questions or anything we can, if we haven't already muddied the waters enough as a board,
No,
provide you with?
this is very clear, and quite frankly, it's a lot of how we're already operating, that's clear guidance. So that's really good. The other thing, just to be like a human shield for the zoning commission, really quick. One of the conundrums that we have is if someone submits an application with a fee and the whole deal, we, as a government, like we can't stop people from making bad decisions in that regard. We have an obligation to kind of run it through the process. And that's part of this free, we've also taken a bit of the free market kind of mentality on a lot of things where it's like you have the right to do whatever you like if you want to run it through the channels. And that's part of that Davis Road. I know you guys are familiar with kind of how that works. We've tried to talk people off the ledge before, but there are necessary limitations to our ability to stop bad applications. And also we can make recommendations, but again, they're solely recommendations. So it's like
Well, the more consistency you get through the zoning board and the more consistency you get from us,
yes,
the easier it is for you to operate. Is that correct?
absolutely.
There has
Sure.
not been there has been a lack of consistency in the past.
But I think this type of exercise really helps us where we can craft a framework. We will share that with the zoning commission. And so again, a lot of their decisions come out of the roadmap that you guys lay out is helpful. And the more clarity that they have in that, you can kind of see that funnel through the other departments and the commissions that we have. So this is very helpful, reiterates a lot of frameworks that we already have. And again, I think the idea of not doing any harm at first is kind of the main thing that we've been operating out of. But this is helpful. I can craft something and I'll bring it before the board, but this will provide more certainty in decision making and how we allocate our time and resources.
So Eddie, one request I would have, and this is to benefit all of us and to simplify, because I know there's a lot of ideas floating around. And you may already have this somewhere. If you have an inventory of the major parcels that are available for development, and then, in one column, and then over here, what our ideas, what we've given you, how that might fit in terms of what happens to parcel A, parcel B. You see what I'm saying? Just kind of a simple column, 2 columns, with some ideas on the right, the parcels on the left, something we can all refer to fairly quickly. And, we can talk about it, once you have that created. I don't think that'll create a lot of work for you, but you may already have something like that, but I think it would help with future discussions to simplify things. Parcel ideas, consistent with what the board has expressed to you.
As far as like the target or key sites that we have.
Yeah, you
Okay.
listed some of them, but there are
Okay.
likely others, but maybe throwing back Jord or whatever.
Okay.
But
Sounds good.
All right. Brenda, anything else you'd like to add? Thank you for coming tonight. We appreciate it. Thank you for your input.
let me ask one quick question, Brenda. This is because I've asked about this a couple of times, the JED. I know that there's some drawbacks, obviously, some potentially, significant gains to be seen from those. Are those generally considered, are those difficult to implement as far as with respect to the parcels, the owners? I mean, are they really super controversial?
They are less something like that, George, which is vacant or essentially has to be completely started. There's no existing businesses. It's problematic to put a JED in place in an existing business district where they're not currently paying an income tax. And you want them to sign up to pay for an income tax that if they don't sign up for, they don't otherwise have to pay. And when you put a JED in place, property owners and business owners, because in some cases they're the same, in other cases they're not, have to agree to be part of the JED and be taxed. So it is very difficult to get enough people to consent to putting a JED on an existing business district. On a vacant piece of property or property that has structures that they all wipe out and start over, and you don't have any businesses operating, it's much easier because you're working with a single property owner or a single developer, and you're negotiating why they're going to subject this property to an income tax and what you're going to do for them in exchange for that. And we did have discussions and start paperwork for a JED on that George a number of years ago when there was a possibility of the development that then did not occur, and so the paperwork never got finished and it was shelved and the JED did not go into place. But this, this community did talk about putting a JED in and did think that under the prior proposed development plan that a JED would be beneficial to all parties, and we didn't start that, but it lends itself better to newer development. It's very difficult in an existing development situation.
Okay, that kind of answers my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Brenda. Right. Well, do we have any other discussion?
No?
None? Okay. Any other public comment? Anybody from the crowd?
We already heard from Brenda, so she can't talk
All these, yeah, Brenda, you're out. All these folks that we have.
Mr. Kelly, sorry, the one thing I
Yeah,
have is
sure.
we are advertising for a planning director position. So
Okay.
our planning and zoning assistant, Terry Ogden, has been working for a couple of weeks. She's doing great. But we do have that vacancy. So it's advertised and we have some interviews lined up for next week.
Okay, good to know. Well, you'll certainly get a lot of interest as to all the people that are watching this evening, so. All right, let's see. I think that's it. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Seconded. Any discussion?
Motion is second. Do I have any discussion?
None,
Are we sure?
I'm sure.
Are we sure? All right, roll call.
Mr. Campbell.
Yes?
Raymond.
Yep.
Yes.
And we're
All right. Next meeting, March 12th.